Okay, thanks everybody. And
Nice job. Thank you. Good product.
we're out of mics for wearable mics because we have another panel coming up right behind us. So first, I'm going to tell everyone, make an announcement here. That's rumbling back there, not thunder. We don't have thunder in San Diego. We're going to change the schedule a little bit. So I've always said this is more like soccer than American football. And because we have everybody in the room, because we have everybody ready to go, we're going to blow right through the break that we had scheduled after this panel and go to the updates from PepsiCo and from Walgreens, and then to our final discussion on Open Health, which is part panel, part announcement. And then we'll do the break and the networking and the demo pavilion. But I think this is going to be the more comfortable and convenient way and make sure we have as much attention to everything as possible. So secondly then, we have a really interesting panel coming up. WLSA struck a partnership with an organization called Sharecare. It was co-founded by Jeff Arnold, who is the co-founder of WebMD. And he'll talk a little bit of that. He's going to moderate a panel with three very different perspectives on the concept of the engaged health consumer, which is what Sharecare is all about. But first, we've asked one of those panelists, Dr. James Fowler from UCSD, to talk for a few minutes about his work. James Colbert called him Jimmy Jam when he went on his show, is a professor of medical genetics and political science at UCSD. Really interesting combination. If you don't know his work, he's just going to give you a taste of it, and then we'll have the panel discussion. So, James?
Thanks very much. So today I want to talk to you guys very briefly about some of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of how we might make ourselves healthier as a society. And I have to tell you that I think the next revolution in health isn't going to come from you, it's going to come from your friends. And there's 4 different ways I just want to highlight where we think friends are going to be critical over the next 10 years as we enter this big data revolution of massively collected, passively collected data. So first I'm going to talk about friends as data, friends as sensors, friends as motivators, and friends as multipliers. First of all, friends as data. One of the things that Nicholas Christakis and I have learned from our studies of the Framingham Heart Study is that it's very easy to predict what you're going to do based on what your friends have done. And in fact, for example, in our study of obesity, we found that we can predict whether or not you are obese, not just based on your friends, but based on your friends' friends, and even your friends' friends' friends. And so you have these clusters of behavior that extend out to 3 degrees of separation. And utilizing that data to figure out who's at risk for different health outcomes is going to be really crucial. We don't yet have those kinds of studies. We're doing those studies, they're in progress now, but we do know from one study of voting behavior on Twitter that I can actually do a better job of predicting whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat using your friends' tweets than I can using your very own tweets. And the reason why is because while that friend information is maybe lower quality, is actually much more quantity. And so really sort of, the noise gets sort of washed out. And so using friends as data, this is going to be really critical as we try to figure out, whether or not you're going to have a heart attack. Well, let's look and see whether or not the friends and friends' friends did. Another area of work that we've engaged in is using friends as sensors. And so one of the really interesting things about friends is this thing called the friendship paradox. Has anyone ever heard of this? It's this idea that your friends have more friends than you do. It's not that you guys are uniquely unpopular. It's just that this is a property of networks. Someone who has 10 friends is going to be named by 10 other people as a friend on their list. And so as a result, whenever you name a friend, they tend to be more central in the network. And in fact, when we follow those people, we can get advance warning on anything that's spreading through the network. So we did this at Harvard with some students during the H1N1 epidemic, and we found that by following the friends, we got 2 weeks advance warning on when the epidemic would peak. And we now have a project with Twitter showing that we can predict epidemic outbreaks of hashtags. And these hashtags include things like searches for flu-related terms and other health-relevant topics. And so using those friends to predict the future is something that I think will be really powerful as well. We also have new work on friends as motivators. We already have real-world information about friends, about how powerful they can be in terms of helping people to achieve their health goals. And so Rena Wing at Brown University, she did this wonderful study to try to figure out the power of friends in dieting. And what she did is she had people come into her lab in groups of 1 or 2. The people who just came by themselves, she randomly either assigned them to diet alone or to diet with strangers. And then the people who came in pairs, she randomly assigned them to either diet with strangers or to diet with the friends that they came in with. And what she found was that at each step, you got an improvement because of the social support you were getting from the person you're going with this process. The strangers, when they were dieting together, they did better than the strangers dieting alone, and the friends did better than the strangers. And so what we're starting to see is not only are these friends able to help us predict your behavior, they can actually change your behavior. They can motivate your behavior. And one of the things that we've been doing with Kevin Patrick at the Qualcomm Institute is a social mobile wellness intervention where we are at year 1 of a 2-year study to try to engage individuals using social and mobile to lower their weight and to keep this weight off. And some preliminary evidence suggests that the more active people are in the social mobile environment, the better that they're doing. So last thing, I just want to talk about friends as multipliers. And again, it's early days for us to be able to measure this in the health space, but we've already done this in the politics space. In 2010, I worked directly with Facebook to conduct a massive randomized controlled trial of 61 million people. This was during the election in 2010, and we showed some people a get out the vote message, and we showed some people nothing. And we'd randomly assign that so we could see what these people did. And we didn't just measure clicks on a button that said I voted. We went out and grabbed 6 million publicly available voter registration records to see whether or not Facebook was getting people off the couch and into the polling booth. And what we found was extraordinary. The message directly affected about 60,000 people. About 60,000 people who saw the message voted when they wouldn't have voted if they hadn't seen the message. But that's not even the coolest thing about the study. The coolest thing about the study is their friends also voted more. And in fact, that got an extra 280,000 people to vote. So for every 1 person that was affected directly, there were 4 to 5 people who were affected indirectly. And so this gives you the idea of this power, this multiplier effect that we're hoping to achieve with these new programs where we're trying to improve people's health. This has not yet been measured, but it should be measured. Because imagine you go out and you do a health intervention, and you think you only helped 100 people. You might think that was unsuccessful, but if that's the kind of intervention that spreads from person to person to person, maybe unbeknownst to you, you actually helped 1,000 people. And then you stop doing the intervention because you think you didn't help anyone. It's really important that we measure these multiplier effects and try to identify the people in the network who are most connected and most influential in spreading those effects. I think that's going to be much, much more powerful than some of the things that we've been trying to do to tweak these interventions in terms of helping us all to promote better health in the society. And so let me just wrap up by saying I'm just so excited to be alive right now. This is a really wonderful time. I've been studying social networks since the late 1990s. And during the last decade, all this social data became available for the first time. And now what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to really use this to change the future. If you really want to know about health, you have to understand how and why we are all connected. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeff Arnold, co-founder and CEO of Sharecare and today's moderator of the Engaged Health Consumer, and his panelist, Dr. James Fowler, professor of medical genetics and political science at the University of California, San Diego, Dr. Daniel Kraft, FutureMed and Singular University, and Brendan Gallager, Senior Vice President, Emerging Technology and Channels at Digitas Health.
Great. Good afternoon. It's nice to be here today. I know that a lot of the conversation the last couple days is realizing that we're kind of at the beginning of this health-conscious consumer movement. And I was out of healthcare for a few years after founding WebMD. And I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. Oz, and we kind of started brainstorming as he was starting his TV show of how do we kind of captivate this moment of this health-conscious consumer. And in our brainstorming, we thought, there really shouldn't be one WebMD. There should be technology platforms that are created. There should be partnerships that are formed with industry leaders, and we should inspire digital caregiving. And what's happened over the last couple years, and I think this conference is a good demonstration of that, is that there's been, because of industry now, this really groundswell of new technologies. But at the same time, there's this elephant in the room that I think all of us have the question of, is that are these technologies and these solutions going to keep the attention of the connected consumer long enough so that we can demonstrate outcomes and the lowering of cost? And at the same time, as we all have this excitement about mobile technologies, and could mobile technologies be the breakthrough that take us from a healthcare system to a system of health and wellness? Or are all these new apps just going to confuse the consumer even more? So I was very excited today to have the opportunity to kind of take what we've been thinking about from WebMD and Sharecare, which is watching the connected consumer go from access to engagement, and be able to have these great panelists here and be able to ask them questions. And so the way I kind of created the questions were, if I was fortunate enough to be able to sit with these guys in our office in Atlanta, these would be the questions that we would ask, that we would want to know. So with that, maybe James, I thought I'd start with you, kind of coming off of what you just talked about. But with all your experience and study in social networks, like Facebook and Twitter and these new emerging health ones, how are we going to improve our health and wellness through these social networks? And how do you construct a scientific framework to prove meaningful impact?
Yeah, so I'll just emphasize again that friends can be used in a variety of different ways. There's going to be lots of really interesting information about users specifically. Like, we're going to learn a lot about you, right? But we're going to learn a lot more about you if we know who your friends are and what's happening to them. And so we're going to need to use this information to be able to create these risk measures, right? And then we're going to need to be able to use this as a platform for delivering these interventions so that they can spread from one person to another.
Right. And then, I heard as we were coming back from the voter standpoint, and then you construct these scientific frameworks around that. So as you look at all this data, then you can actually say, actually show the impact through.
Yeah. So the voter study was on the cover of Nature, and we went through a process of scientific evaluation on that paper where, we had to show confidence intervals and do all the things that scientists do in order to be able to establish that these are real causal effects. And I know that's just political behavior. It's early days to figure out whether or not we can do this for health, but those studies are underway. We're into 1 year and a 2-year study. In 2 years, I'll come back next year. I can tell you how we did. I think really we're going to find that these social mobile opportunities are great for health as well.
Right. And is it just massive amounts of data that was hard to get access to in the past?
Yeah, no, absolutely. When we did the Premium Heart Study, social network studies, that was old school. We just went and asked people who are your friends. And so to be able to have that all online already, and you just sort of have people click a button to give you access to it, it's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. And Daniel, kind of in the spirit of the quantified self, many of us, I see you're wearing one and I have one, we've got our jawbones and we're creating our social networks. So we've got our family and we have our friends and we have our colleagues and we have our friends of friends kind of participating in these social teams. And I was wondering, have you found that people stay engaged in their health longer when they can compare their data to others?
Well, I think we're sort of moving from quantified self to quantified health now that these devices and other things are being potentially plugged into your physician, your healthcare systems, and beyond. And I think, yes, it works better. We're social animals. And whether you're in the Army or on a team or rooting for a sports team, we like to be sort of in tribes and often compete. And the ability now to connect these with your friends and colleagues, almost each of them has leaderboards. For some, give the ability to do one for the Gipper because the whole team succeeds if they want to have one division of a company compete against another, or just get the social attribution to that element. So I think it's not a solo game anymore, and the connectivity part is key. I think one part that we still need to work out is it's still just like many drugs are one size fits all. Some individuals are going to need different incentive programs and sort of behavioral design. I like to think of it like a Myers-Briggs for behavior, not just for personality. And then I think we can tune these things better because people with different carrots and sticks. And that's one element that still isn't quite out there yet.
Yeah, let me give you an example. So they did a nice randomized control trial with NPR. on donations. And they had some operators say, thank you for calling NPR. Others said, thank you for calling NPR. The last person gave $5. The last person gave $10. The last person gave $20. And they just tried a whole bunch of different things to see how norming people's donations would work. And they found a sweet spot right at the 90th percentile of the distribution that optimized how people reacted. It's not going to be the 90th percentile of the distribution for all these things. If you show like your 90th percentile most healthy friend, there might be some people who just give up. Right, but we're going to have the opportunity in these online contexts to do exactly that study and find out that sweet spot of what kind of social information is going to maximally move the needle.
Yeah. And I was going to ask the question is in the spirit of motivation, why is it so motivating, do you think, to be part of these social teams? I mean, I wouldn't think that it's merely about winning, who has the most steps and who's at the top of the leaderboard. Is it self-awareness? Is it responsibility? What is it, do you think, that makes this so much more engaging, competing against others, or being part of social teams?
There's the competition part. There's also having that little bit of that dashboard and seeing your own data, which is for some people sort of addicting and empowering, when you can see the trend lines over time and where that might take you, sort of the future you. Having that element that was mentioned earlier of the check engine light that might give you a warning that you're off the wrong path. And then again, many people will do things again for others. When they know that their extra 10,000 steps that week will have their team kick over, they'll do things they wouldn't otherwise.
Right.
I think there's an accountability piece to it as well. Like
exactly.
when your personality and your identity is on the line in the context of a group, it's a bit more motivating than left to our own devices. I mean, left to our own devices, the technology piece isn't that new. A treadmill was a piece of technology at one point. We still bought it and put it in the basement and just let it gather dust. By grouping up, tapping into that kind of tribe mentality, I think we put our reputation on the line a little bit, and that in and of itself is a motivating factor.
Yeah, we don't know whether you jogged. We don't know whether you lost a pound. It'd probably be very hard to detect. So if there's something other people can see, then we know it, and they know it, and we know that they know it.
Yep. And it's interesting. I saw your interview on the Colbert Report, which was really fun to watch and educational. And you said something that made me think about this question, knowing that we're going to be together this week. It's how connected do participants need to be to these groups? Do you get different results if the people have no personal connection to each other?
We absolutely get different results. And in our health studies, what we have always found is that the strongest correlations in behavior are between the strong ties. So just for example, in our study of obesity, if your spouse gains weight, you're going to gain weight. If your closest friend gains weight, you're going to gain weight. If your sibling gains weight, you're going to gain weight. But if your next door neighbor gains weight, there's no effect on you whatsoever. And so in that study, we didn't have, say, acquaintances, but that's kind of something close to an acquaintance. Your next door neighbor, you probably know them, but maybe on average, you aren't necessarily that close to them. And this is what we're finding in the online world as well. In the voter study, we divided up the Facebook friends into the 140 people that you probably didn't know in real life, and then 10 people that you probably did know in real life. And those 10 people out of the 150 connections that people have on average on Facebook, they did all the work. They accounted for all 280,000 of those behavior changes. And this is what I expect we're going to find with health as well, that you need to find the real friends on Facebook.
Right. Okay, amazing. So, Brandon, I saw that you said that we have an opportunity of being more relevant at some of the most crucial moments in a patient's life, the point of diagnosis and the treatment decision. And so I was wondering, for the empowered consumer, what's more important at the information gathering moment? Is it search? Is it social? Or is it the patient to doctor dialogue, if you had to pick one?
That's a good one. Well, I think search is kind of table stakes. I think at this point you need to be relevant when someone's actually asking or querying terms that actually make sense. And I think social is a big opportunity, especially for pharmaceutical manufacturers, in terms of building connections and communities where patients desperately need more kind of service and attention. But I got to say the physician-patient moment is the holy grail moment. And I think from an opportunity standpoint, the more we can save the physician time and motivate that patient at probably one of the most emotionally charged moments of their life, and that is the moment that sets them on the path to being adherent, sets them on the path to making more confident healthcare, healthier choices. And I think there's a screen there now that wasn't there 5-6 years ago, and that's a tablet. So there's a huge opportunity for industry to build patient education materials and things that'll help make patients make more confident healthcare decisions.
What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think with the convergence of technologies, there are now even $35 Android tablets being made in India. and the fact that that's cheaper than most drugs, we'll be prescribing tablets with preloaded apps optimized to the patient to get them engaged. There's several components that are already out there. As a physician, I'd rather not spend my time doing a review of systems with the patient, but already know from their phone and their sensors everywhere what their sort of social and other elements have been and their vital signs, so we can be more engaged. We don't want technology to be in the way of the patient-doctor relationship, but more enabling it. And there's, I think, that double-edged sword that can be enabled by some of these smart technologies, and some that we can almost, again, give away.
Right, and those technologies, I think, they are, we were talking about this earlier, that our expectations are set by our entire online experience, not just our experience with antiquated healthcare systems, right? So we walk in there, now that these technologies are becoming more ubiquitous, with a different set of expectations. So when I do walk into that holy grail moment, and I have my Jawbone data, or I have my Basis data, or I have my 23andMe data, and I say, all right, great, I've been responsible, engaged consumer, put this in my electronic medical record, and they give you a little laugh and say, well, we do the $10,000 version of that genome. That expectation will drive change.
Right, that's great. And with all this change and all this data, I was in DC last week, and I was participating in this conference. As you can imagine, in being DC, there was all these privacy concerns, and that's where most of the questions from the audience were coming from. And I was thinking, James, to you, will these privacy concerns become a barrier to the health-conscious consumer, or have social networks trained us to share but not really care?
So I think that we are learning to share a bit more, but I also think that there are sort of two polar interpretations of what's going on, and neither one of them is quite correct. You have one set of people who personally themselves would never share any of their data, and they get really upset about the idea of sharing and about the idea that a lot of people are sharing without knowing about it. And I think that these are sort of the folks at the core of a lot of the privacy concern debates. You have another set of people who think we should share everything, and that should be the default, and this is going to change society. And I think that in the middle, what you see is a reasoned consumer who decides to share when it's beneficial to them. And so just a great example, the real age test, 30 million people have taken this test. I think the reason why is because at the end of giving away all this health information about yourself, you get this score that's actually really useful to you in terms of you thinking about your own health. And I think you give people just a little bit, even the tiniest bit of value for their data, they're going to be perfectly fine sharing a lot of that data and helping you to build these engines that are going to make them healthier.
Yeah. My favorite example would be when you drive with Google Maps or with Waze, you sort of volunteer your speed and your position. Then you can benefit by having the entire map with where the traffic is and what your best route is to work or what have you. And when folks get some little value out of it, and they don't really care if you report their position, there could be privacy concerns, they know where you're driving. That adds in immense value as we crowdsource all that. And that I think will be shifting, hopefully, the perception of being not just an organ donor or a blood donor, that you can be a data donor. And with better sort of Facebook-like settings, you can be very specific. You're not going to share your mental health data, but you'll share your vital sign movement and your other trends. So I think it can be a mix.
There are futurists in our business, in the marketing world, that talk about sharing of data as the currency in marketing going forward. So to find that mutual value between, if I give you this, what kind of value are you going to give in exchange, as opposed to shoving 6,000 different types of messages through different channels.
Right, and how will big pharma and biotech, how do they kind of fit into the data donor world with the regulations that they have to deal with, and how do they think through that today?
Well, I mean, big pharma and they're no stranger to the data business. So you could argue in that industry there's been more unconnected data pipes than almost any other industry in the world. I think their benefit and challenge is going to be the data is going to challenge one of their core business value propositions, which is the clinical data associated with the molecules that they produce. When there's a ubiquity of electronic medical records and the real world data trumps the clinical data, then what's what value am I bringing? So that causes them to fundamentally shift their marketing approach. Their commercial model needs to change. Right. And I'd argue that you have to put the customer experience at the top of that pyramid as opposed to the features and benefits of the molecule. So you could, in theory, as a life sciences company, have a customer experience goal that you're trying to create for a patient population, of which, within that experience, there may or may not be a molecule associated with it.
There's also an opportunity on the research side. Last week I was at a working group at the NIH thinking about the citizen scientist, and beyond sort of just crowdsourcing, how do we get folks engaged, whether it's in clinical trials? And so several big pharma companies are rethinking about how clinical trials are done, how they engage the consumer using mobile and smart systems and apps and beyond, and to also get folks engaged even on the research side. You've seen examples like Fold It, where you can have a housewife in Ohio being the best protein folder. So there's ways that pharma and beyond can engage the consumer and patient and potential patient in smart new ways, both in the research and the clinical trial regimen.
Not to mention the crowdfunding potential. I mean, if they could fund Veronica Mars in 2 hours on Kickstarter, then you can certainly find a rare disease state to fund a stage 1 clinical trial.
So I'm going to ask this question, each one in slightly different ways. But, Daniel, I know that you see so many different emerging technologies, and you're speaking to different leaders of healthcare systems, of large payers, of Fortune 500 companies. What's the advice that you give to them about embracing these new technologies?
Well, there's 2 layers. I think one, we're seeing the incentive shifting to sort of healthcare, not just sick care. So wearing my hat from Singularity University and FutureMed, we're sort of all about looking at where the technology trends are happening and where they're converging, sort of the theme of this summit. And that you don't want to be building a new drug, device, app, system, EMR, whatever it might be, looking at 2012, 2013, you want to be looking at it 2015 or 16. Where is, for example, human genome sequencing? It's moving down from $2,000 to be $100 in a couple of years. So you might want to build your IT infrastructure to have a way of storing, $100 genomes or less. You want to be thinking about what the quantified health and sensors are going to be packed together on your phone or on your body within 2 or 3 years. You want to be looking at where the payers and the incentives will lie. So meta trends, be aware of trends in artificial intelligence and 3D printing and mobile and quantified self, and look slightly 2 to 5 years out, and that's where you should be going where the puck is going.
Right. And Brendan, is your thoughts as you give advice to pharma and biotech along those same lines, or do you have to think of it a little differently?
I think it's a little bit different. My advice usually is along the lines of, you've created a product, and your role now going forward is going to be helping this person engage with this product in the most successful way possible. So from a consumer standpoint, it's more relevant, what we used to call CRM campaigns, but more along the lines of actual patient support. On the healthcare professional side, which, for the purposes of this conversation, I'd still call a consumer of sorts, are you, instead of shoving reps in there and hammering efficacy data over their heads, are you actually helping them truly enhance their knowledge or their stature with their colleagues, or helping them run a better practice given the new Affordable Care Act landscape, or even most importantly, helping their patients have better outcomes?
Right. So it's almost like kind of moving so far beyond the banner ad now to it all being so data-driven.
Right,
Yeah.
right. We call it helping, not selling.
Yeah. And then, it's kind of interesting to think, from how would an industry leader look at it from Daniel's perspective to how you would talk to pharma and biotech, and the support that a CEO would have in each one of those examples around them to be able to look at the analytics and start to make the decisions on their own of how to embrace these new technologies. But, James, you're looking at the billion people in Facebook that don't have an analytics team and don't have an SEO team and don't have people, connecting these devices on their behalf. How do they make sense of all this?
Well, they need an analytics team. And I think that's what we're going to be able to give them. I mean, my dream, and I'm sure this will happen in the next 10 years, maybe sooner, hopefully. My dream is that we don't have CDC warnings that flu risk is high in San Diego today. Instead, you get a thing on Facebook that says, your risk of flu is high today. 3 of your friends who you spend a lot of time with, they all have the flu. You better go get vaccinated right now.
Right.
And we'll be able to prove the efficacy of this. Because you have so much valuable information about you and about your friends there that we're going to be able to develop these personalized warnings. I love genetics. I love the capacity to bring biology into this equation. But up to now, most of our ability to predict what happens to the average consumer from genetics is extremely limited. So think about body mass index. Its weight, its height. You would think that we would do a really good job at that, but our best bet right now is a 22-marker index that explains 1% of the differences between people. Whereas you look at some of these social studies, you see like how predictive your friend is of your outcomes. You're explaining 20, 30, 40% of the differences. So 20 to 30, 40 factor increase in our predictive capacity, and yet billions of dollars, maybe even $1 trillion at this point, has been poured into the biotech side, and so much less into the social side. And so untapping that potential, realizing that potential for prediction and for persuasion, I think is going to be something that's going to be just really powerful in this decade. This is exactly what I would tell pharma to do, is unlock the sociome.
Right. And as you've been working on this for 20 years, is that movement now influencing your day-to-day work? I mean, is this engaged, health-conscious, empowered consumer wearing data with groundswells of new technologies? I mean, is this so different of like how you think about adoption?
Well, I'm based in the Bay Area, so we can sometimes have a little bit of a bubble. We think everyone has an iPhone and a Fitbit.
Right.
But there's the opportunity now for the new drug is the engaged, empowered consumer. And that can have dramatic impact, especially when tied into the social network.
Blockbuster.
Right.
Well, Blockbuster's been disrupted by Netflix, right? So this disruption that's about to.
No, I meant
to
a blockbuster
It is a
drug.
blockbuster,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Well, and some drugs are going to be disrupted, like there's the example of WellDoc, which a year or so ago published the fact that if you just incentivize your patient to put in their blood glucose in their app, and then the doc could adjust it, they lowered their hemoglobin A1C by 2 points. That's bigger than any blockbuster drug would do. So when do we start prescribing apps for very specific indications? And when can I prescribe you exercise? I'm going to prescribe you this, and I'm going to track your activity, and I'll give you a bonus on your insurance premium, if you do well. So I think there's a bit of that convergence now that the consumers are getting more engaged. They're seeing some more of these tools. They're playing with them.
Yeah.
And now the incentives are getting aligned to both for the clinician. So if I'm a doc and you're my primary care patient, I'm going to get a bonus at the end of the year if everyone's hemoglobin A1C is a better level, everyone overall blood pressure is doing better. So I might send some patients home with a connected blood pressure cuff,
Right.
and help tune that in better ways. So where it used to be just fee for service, now with value-based elements on the clinician side, it's going to mix.
I just want to jump in for a minute and say something that might be a little controversial in this room, and that is I think there are actually limits on how many people will fully adopt the quantified self way of life. I know,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I think that you start there because those are the people that are going to give us all the data to build the models, right? And so maybe that's 5-10% of the population. So how do you reach the other 95-90%? What you do is you create automatic decision support recommendations. Right, so it's not you looking at your A1C. It's an app that tells you what you should be doing. It's an app that gives you access to people who are going to help to persuade you to change your behavior. And so I just think we really need to gear up for the fact that there's going to be this two-tier, and maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 90-10. Who knows what it's going to be? But not everybody is going to be directly accessing this data and doing decision support. Just like not everyone in a company is accessing the analytics. You don't need every single person in the company to do that. You probably only need the people managing the company to do that.
Well, that's why your work in the social side of the equation, I think, is so important because it gets at the emotional drivers of those little moments. So, we worked with a company that was trying to figure out adherence for hypertension, right? And it was like, can we send them little texts that kind of say, remember, your arteries are like underwear. Once they're stretched, they don't go back. And it's, all I could think of was for this challenge, right prior to this, I had worked with some nephrologists in Europe, and I had gone around talking to them, and they were saying around 30% of their patients who had just gotten their kidney transplanted weren't taking the drug that keeps your body from rejecting the kidney. Now, these people are people that were 3 to 5 years on dialysis every week for 2 to 3 days a week, waiting for a kidney to free up. They finally get it. All they have to do is take this drug to keep your body from rejecting it, and 30% of them are still not doing that. And you're going to solve it for hypertension?
Right.
So I think, the more we can get at those emotional drivers of why we make these crazy decisions, and they are crazy because, we don't like to think about our own mortality, the more successful we'll be.
We're working on this exciting program right now with the DoD, and 2,000 different soldiers a day have to take the real age test, and then a certain number of them get Fitbits, and it's all being funded by the DoD. And it's very exciting, and you get to look at the data, and you get this empowered consumer, and you can send them messages and do these great things. But I spend a lot of my time when I'm talking to different companies, and they're like, you need to focus on chronic care. Those are the people that are going to do these things because, they're sick, and they're going to be highly motivated to get better. And I sometimes struggle with that of, do I need to focus in that area because of that motivation, or is this connected consumer movement real enough that we can actually change behaviors and change society along the way? And if you're not part of this, there might even be a stigma, for it. Just like smoke, like if you smoke today, where there wasn't when you didn't smoke or when you smoked 10 years ago. And I know, James, I've heard your thoughts on that before. Like, what do you think about that?
I think you're missing a huge opportunity. I can't remember what the latest figures are, but it's more than half of our healthcare costs are going to things like diabetes and smoking, and these things where you could modify behavior and get a different outcome. Adherence is another one like we were just talking about. And so, yes, you want to focus on chronic care because people are highly motivated there, but that doesn't mean you give up on this other thing. We just need a science of motivation, just like we have a science of the body in terms of designing drugs that will fix these chronic conditions.
Yep. And Brandon, do you think in the future pills and programs will go hand in hand, that there'll be digital therapy? So here's your weight loss pill, and here's your weight loss program. Here's your sleep pill with your sleep program, and
Absolutely.
on and on and on.
And in fact, I mean, just from a commercial viability standpoint, if you look at in the pharmaceutical industry, they refer to this patent cliff, right? The end of the blockbusters and the beginning of real niche, products. One of the ways you could combat that cliff is essentially commercializing programs along with the products that you're creating.
Yeah.
So even if the product goes off patent, you still have a commercially viable program with clinical efficacious data that says the program works X amount as well as the drug.
Yeah, and it seems like there's this big theme now that we're going from companies don't want to be healthcare companies, they want to be health companies.
Right.
With it. And so I was a little scared to pick the number of years to ask you this question to you for, especially I'm from Atlanta, not from San Francisco, so I could totally blow this. But, what do you think connected devices will be able to do in 5 years that they can't do today?
Well, I think we're still sort of if you're looking at connected devices on a trend line, we're still at sort of, version 1. There's still they do one thing, they count your steps pretty well. They might look at your EKG. We're going to merge into much more integrated ones that are sort of becoming more seamless. They're being embedded in our clothes, our cars. I think Ford is putting sensors in some cars. Our refrigerator will know when you're cheating by opening it up at 2 in the morning. So there won't be any one element, but I think there'll be this, the Internet of Things is certainly emerging, so IP addresses for everything. I've got an example in my pocket of one of these patches under development that you sort of just wear stuck to your chest wall, and it does not just your EKG, a 2-lead, but your movement, if you're falling down or not, your relative respiratory rate, relative blood pressure, not saturation, but how hydrated you are. And these will be $2 disposable devices. This is probably will be very common in a couple of years that you'll send home when you discharge someone from the hospital or you're trying to manage chronic disease. And I think, as we've seen from some of the companies and others here, it's going to be the integration of all these in seamless ways to give you a heads up, whether it's encouragement or a warning sign, as opposed to sort of having to log into 10 different apps for 10 different pieces of your quantified health equation.
Go ahead.
No, I think in 2 to 3 years or 4, 5, whatever the range is, I think we're going to see more mature business models based around the financial incentives of being quantified. So, when these exchanges open in October and the entire payer and insurance market is all holding their breath right now to see whether it's going to explode or we're going to have to adjust really fast. And in 2 to 3 years, I'm saying I will start seeing models, like a true market that says, well, you can have the $20 a month version of insurance where we actually put an implant in your arm and you can't cheat the system and we know your blood levels. Or you can have the $200 a month version where we don't want to hear anything that you're doing, but your premiums are going to be through the roof.
That sounds creepy.
Yeah, but I mean that's what happens when you inject capitalism into a market that never had transparency before, which we are getting now.
And car insurance companies, Progressive Car Insurance,
Right.
will put a sensor in your
Great
car if you're a bad
example.
driver, and if you're driving better, they'll lower the rates,
Yep.
and if you're speeding and accelerating too fast, it'll up your
Same
rates.
idea, but for behavior.
So James, if you had access to all the data of the 30 million people taking the real age test, and if all those people, let's say the next 10 million people who take the test all came through Facebook Connect, and you could then look at that data of people's real age and the 110 questions, and then you could look at their social network, what would you learn from that?
When can we start? The very first thing I'd want to do is build predictive models. Right? So if you know, for example, who's been diagnosed with cancer, let's just use the social data to see if we can predict that. I don't think we'll do as well with cancer as we do with heart conditions, for example. I think there you'll get lots of predictive capacity based on your friends, just based on our other social network work. And if to the extent that you can build better models of who's at risk, you can invest more resources in a fewer number of people. So the second stage of this would be, okay, let's design an intervention and see if we can really move the needle with something that we thought was really small, but it can become really big.
Yeah, that's exciting. Okay, so there was a question I had in here I want to miss. Daniel, is we spend so much money, designing websites, and you've heard the saying that, or the question is the PC dead? And should we be taking those investment dollars for these people that are building these websites, as one of them who does that, and be invested into the mobile technologies because that's where we're going to get the greatest gains in personalized medicine? How do you feel about that?
I think we'll still need a need for our big screens at times, but more and more of our touch time is going to be on our mobile experience, and that experience is clearly going to change. As I mentioned earlier, I think next week I'm getting my first Google Glass, and we had the head of Google Glass stop by FutureMed in February, and the implications for that I think are really magical for healthcare. Maybe those debated as a kludgy and dorky, but imagine, you're a clinician, you're able to see your patient's vital signs, pull up their social network data. You're in the ICU, you can see vital signs, and then to flip it on the consumer side, you're looking at your breakfast that morning, it pops up with the calories and warns you you're over your calorie limit for the day or for the week, or can connect you in powerful ways with your social network to do some of these gamifying elements. And so that's just one example. I think just how we couldn't quite imagine what the iPad or the iPhone would have done 5 years ago. That platform, I think, and others are working on
the PC
it.
itself.
Yeah, will be transformative on the health spectrum. The idea that you can have your own healthcare GPS and it's in your heads-up display that you should turn right to go to the gym and not left to the McDonald's will be elements that start becoming embedded in our life, and we'll be incentivized to do that.
And those examples are really obvious, and they might sound kind of horrifying to have some sort of machine telling you, don't eat that sausage. But I think that what we're going to learn is that the most effective messages are not direct. That there are ways of we're going to know when you're about to sit down for breakfast, right? And there might be things that we can do before you even get to the table that will help you to make the healthy choice without just nagging at you. Oh, don't eat that sausage. Well, I already knew that. So what can you do for me that's going to allow me to get into this mental space where I can actually make that choice? And it may not be the direct messages, but it's going to be utilizing that same information that you're getting from this ubiquitous source of information.
Remember, like when you're growing up and you knew somebody that knew somebody from the academy and could get like the movies that were nominated for the Oscars early. They were getting like the screeners. I have a feeling you're that for all health technologies. You get the patches and the goggles, and it must be amazing, like the wave of new technologies that you're seeing. I mean, is that accelerated over the last 12 months at like a rapid pace, or is it been consistent for you over the last kind of 3 to 5 years?
Well, I don't think it's I think it is ramping up. I mean, you're seeing now the explosion or the generation of these new health accelerators like Rock Health that you're familiar with. And the powerful part is that folks are coming with beginner's mind, folks who are gaming programmers or the statistics world and big data, who never been in a clinic much or have healthcare friends or family been involved and are motivated to do something different. They want to do something that matters. So there's a lot of new energy from folks from different technology spectrums, whether applying AI, robotics, or nanotech, or IT, and that's where things are accelerating together. So I think it is speeding up, and I think people's imaginations are opening up as to what's possible. From our standpoint, we look at it from a behavioral shift standpoint. So when you talk about PC to mobile, if you look at it in screen size, that's just going to continue to be. We're going to need a phablet, we're going to need a TV, and we're going to need all that. But if you think about it, like our behaviors kind of went from analog to digital, and then quickly from digital to mobile. And now we're in this place where the trend is really mobile back to analog.
Right.
And there, it puts this mobility puts a premium on location and service.
Right.
And actually, we're seeing analog. The Internet of Things will make the analog piece just as digital as the other part of the triangle.
These new technologies that we've been real fascinated recently is looking at these clinical decision support platforms and how can you bring them direct to consumer. And the way I like to describe it, it's how do you build Watson meets Uber, right? Watson being the supercomputer that can win on Jeopardy, and Uber being the great way to get a car service. So you go through guided search, and all of a sudden you get a diagnosis, and it says, here's your doctor from your health plan that's right around you, and you can connect with them immediately, whether it's schedule an appointment or eventually FaceTiming. And I often kind of wonder about, what's the appropriate role for the doctor in all of this, right? So as you think about these social networks and these connected consumers, is it information sharing? Is it access to online scheduling or telehealth? Is it wellness programs? Is it clinical decision support? Or is it none of the above, because we haven't been able to create these kind of safe social havens yet, or these patient to provider bridges? And so I don't know, but I'd be curious what you all think about that. Like, what's the role in the doctor in this? Because we're all so inspired about the empowered consumer, truly. How does the doctor not slow it down?
Well, part of it is there was a story at the cover of Atlantic, and I was interviewed for part of it called "The Robot Will See You Now," right? And some investors and others predict, 80% of docs can be replaced by robots or AIs. And I like to flip it around. We won't be AI, be IA, intelligence augmentation. And as we're in this realm of digital healthcare and being overwhelmed with data, it's not often actionable information. So part of that Uber element and meeting Dr. Watson means you need to have the smart design and the user interface that's not overwhelming and is clear and is specific to that individual. And that will enable sort of the better care in a smarter way without sort of overwhelming either side of the equation. So they need to mix.
Yeah, it's important to remember we still have the same brains that we had 10 years ago. We still have the same desire to connect. Our social networks today look like they looked 100,000 years ago. We know this from studies of hunter-gatherers. And so these doctors, that face-to-face connection is going to be really important. Robots are not going to be the answer. There's still going to be people that want that connection when they're sick, whenever they're asked questions about their health. The question is, do they all need to have the same level of expertise? Can we provide those kinds of services in a face-to-face context with people who are specializing at different sort of ranges of their capacity to be able to serve the consumer? But please, let's not cut out the human being. The human being is really important.
I agree. I think, knowledge or access to knowledge is not the value metric anymore. And I think it was for a long time. This doctor was experienced, knows everything there is to know about this specialty, whatever that might be. Now we have little black boxes in our pocket that have the answers to everything in it. So, which I never thought we were going to have as kids. I thought flying cars were going to be first. But that personal, that human interaction, I think is something that we're all going to need, especially when it comes to end of life discussions and some of the hard, emotionally charged moments in our lives.
Well, I think we were lucky to be able to hear from you guys today, because I think the whole information sharing as we gather this data and we turn this data into knowledge, which hopefully equals engagement, helping that doctor and that patient do it together, it's going to be exciting to see evolve. And I think you guys are going to be the three leaders that kind of make that happen. So thanks for being a part of this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.